The Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments protect the rights of the accused, or individuals who are accused of crimes. The Fifth Amendment protects 5 rights of individuals, so to help us remember the 5 parts, we use the left hand, which, unless you're anatomically deformed, also has 5 fingers. First, we'll start with the thumb, our grandest finger. This finger is the longest, as the joint starts near the wrist, and without the thumb, we'd never have advanced as a species. So think, my thumb is grand jury. A grand jury is a group of citizens who are called together to review evidence against a person the district attorney would like to charge with a crime. The prosecutor in a case presents preliminary evidence against an individual, and the grand jury votes to determine if they believe there is probable cause that the accused committed a crime. If so, the person is indicted. The right to appear before a grand jury protects all citizens from frivolous arrests. The second finger, or the index finger, is associated with our protection against double jeopardy. The Fifth Amendment guarantees that no person can be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb for the same offense. This means that if you are charged with a crime, you go through a trial, and you're found not guilty, you can never be charged with that same offense again. This prevents the government from prosecuting individuals over and over again in multiple trials if they fail to prove the defendant's guilt in the original trial. So think, second finger, second equals double jeopardy. The third, or middle finger, is associated with the right of the government to take private property for public use, like taking private property for the purposes of constructing a highway. The Takings Clause says that the government must give a person just compensation for the taking of their property. We associate the middle finger with the government's right to eminent domain because if the government came to take your property for public use, which finger would you want to show them? The fourth finger, or the ring finger, is associated with the protection of our rights to due process. Due process means that all citizens will be treated fairly under the judicial system. Things like the right to a non-biased jury of your peers, the right to an attorney, the right to be told of the charges against you. All of these things make our system fairer, and the Fifth Amendment ensures that no citizen has those rights denied. The way to remember this, when you get married, you say, I do. So, I do, due process, I do, due process. Finally, the fifth finger represents the most well-known aspect of the Fifth Amendment, protection against self-incrimination. If, during a criminal investigation, a detective or police officer asked an accused person a question and the truthful answer to this question would reveal evidence of their criminal activity, the person cannot be forced to disclose this information because it would incriminate them. The burden of proof in a criminal trial falls on prosecutors. If they want evidence against an accused person, they have to find it themselves. A defendant does not have to help them in that process under the Fifth Amendment. So the fifth finger represents protection from self-incrimination. If a person yanked on your pinky, you would plead with them to stop, or plead the fifth. The Sixth Amendment also protects the rights of individuals accused of a crime. The protections listed in the Sixth Amendment involve the actual criminal trial. Individuals charged with a crime have the right to a speedy and public trial, meaning the trial cannot be secret and it must happen in a reasonable amount of time after an individual is arrested. We have a right to have our case judged by a jury of our peers who are from our communities. We must know what we are being charged with so that we can prepare a legal defense, and we must be able to both provide and question witnesses in order to defend ourselves. We must also have the help of an attorney who represents our legal interests during the legal proceedings. To remember this amendment, we remember Speedy 6. Draw a 6 and turn it into an attorney speeding off to defend you in court. The Seventh Amendment protects an individual's right to a jury trial in a civil case. This means if a person sues you, or if you sue another person, that we have the right to let a jury hear and decide the case. To remember this amendment, we draw a 7 and civil linked at the V. You can also say 7 civil to help you remember. 7 civil, 7 civil, 7 civil. The Eighth Amendment is the final amendment which protects the rights of individuals accused of crimes. The Eighth Amendment protects us from excessive fines or excessive bail, which would unfairly keep someone in jail, and from cruel and unusual punishment. To remember the part about excessive fines and bail, draw an 8 who is trapped behind bars because he cannot afford to pay his fine. An 8 behind bars looks like a dollar sign. To remember that the Eighth Amendment protects us from cruel and unusual punishment, draw an 8 who is a deceased individual in a hangman's noose. Just because the previous 8 amendments listed specific rights of citizens, that does not mean that those are the only rights guaranteed to citizens. Citizens have many rights, and the fact that they are not specifically listed in the previous amendments does not give the government the power to deny those rights. This is essentially what the Ninth Amendment means. To remember this, draw a 9 and turn it into a stick figure who is covered by a blanket. This amendment is known as the Blanket Amendment, as it covers all of our rights not previously listed. Amendments 1 through 9 protect the rights of individuals, which was one of the concerns of the Anti-Federalist, and the remaining concern of the Federalist was the distribution of power between states and the federal government. They wanted more power vested in state governments. This is where the 10th Amendment comes in. The 10th Amendment says that powers not given to the federal government and also not denied to the states are reserved to state governments. To remember this amendment, write out Ohio and Iowa. If you look closely, you can see Ohio has a 10 in it, as does Iowa. Both of these are states. So the 10th Amendment guarantees states' rights. I do not have a slide for the 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment is not a majorly important amendment. It does state who can and can't sue different entities. This amendment is known as the Judicial Limits Amendment. The 12th Amendment, originally under the Constitution, the individual who received the most electoral college votes became president, while the runner-up became vice president. This meant in practice that the president and vice president were often from different political parties, which made governing very difficult. So the 12th Amendment set out to change that. The 12th Amendment allowed each party to nominate both a president and a vice president, instead of having the first loser president become vice president. The tip to remember this is the number 1 job in the country is president. The number 2 job in the country is vice president. 1 plus 2 is 12. Following the Civil War, the Constitution was amended to formally abolish slavery in the United States. To remember this, draw a 1 and a 3 close together to make a B, which stands for Be Free. Also following the Civil War, Congress anticipated that state governments would enact legislation to limit the rights of former slaves, so the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution in order to try and truly give equal citizenship to all Americans. The language of the amendment specifically limits state governments. First, it says that all people born in the United States are citizens of the United States, granting legal citizenship to former slaves. It goes on to say that states cannot take away the privileges or immunities of citizens, they cannot deny due process of law, and they cannot deny equal protection of the laws. This amendment will prove to be one of the most important of all the amendments. While it was initially intended to protect former slaves, it has been used over time to guarantee numerous rights to all Americans when state governments illegally deny legal protections to various groups. To remember the 14th Amendment, we have a couple of tips. First, turn the 14 upside down. It looks like hi, so you say, "Hi, I'm a citizen," to help you remember the citizenship clause. In addition, you can turn the 14 on its side, erase the middle line that forms the 4, and it creates an equal sign to help you remember equal protection under the law. In addition to abolishing slavery and making former slaves citizens and guaranteeing them equal rights, the Constitution was amended to specifically guarantee voting rights of African American men. To remember the 15th Amendment, remember it would eventually allow Malcolm X to vote. Malcolm X votes. XV in Roman numerals is 15. The 16th Amendment officially allowed Congress to collect taxes from our incomes, gross. To remember, write 16, but turn the 1 into a dollar sign and imagine you have to pay $6 in taxes. The 17th Amendment changed the election process for senators. Under the original Constitution, senators were chosen by elected state legislators. Now we get to vote for them. To remember, chant 17 senators, 17 senators, 17 senators. The 18th Amendment banned the sale, production, consumption, and transportation of alcohol in the United States. To remember that even though you are an adult, you cannot legally drink at the age of 18. The 19th Amendment guaranteed a woman's right to vote. Some states were already allowing women to vote, but this amendment guaranteed that women could vote in all elections across the United States. To remember, draw a 19 and turn it into a woman casting her vote at the poll. The 20th Amendment moved the inauguration date from March to January 20th. Since we elect presidents in November, we had a 4-month period between the election and the new president taking office. That could lead to a lame duck president doing nothing in office for 4 months, so we moved the inauguration date back. It's easy to remember that the 20th Amendment moved the inauguration date to January 20th, 2020. The 20th Amendment moved the inauguration date to January 20th. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. To remember, you can drink at 21. The 22nd Amendment put term limits into place for presidents. Under the original Constitution, presidents were not limited on how many times they could be elected. George Washington set the precedent for president at serving only 2 terms, and no other president after him served more than 2 terms until FDR was elected to 4 terms. After he passed away, we amended the Constitution to prevent that from happening again. Now presidents can only serve twice. To remember, 2-2, 2 terms, 2-2, 2 terms, 2-2, 2 terms. Prior to the 23rd Amendment, people living in Washington, D.C. could not vote for president. Because Washington, D.C. is a district and not a state, therefore they had no points under the Electoral College. Now D.C. is worth 3 Electoral College votes. To remember, 23 D.C., 23 D.C., 23 D.C. The 24th Amendment was added to the Constitution during the 1960s to prevent states from enacting legislation meant to disenfranchise poor Americans, specifically poor blacks in the rural South. A poll tax made someone pay a fee in order to be eligible to vote. The tip to remember is Amendment 24, poll tax no more. The 25th Amendment clarifies who becomes president if a president leaves office. If the president leaves office, the vice president becomes president. The new president, or the former vice president, would then appoint a new vice president who must be approved by Congress. If a vice president must leave office, the president appoints a new vice president who would be approved by Congress. To remember this amendment, remember Amendment 25, who is president if he dies. The 26th Amendment lowered the national voting age to 18. Some states had their voting ages set at 21 years old, but men were being drafted as young as the age of 18 to fight in Vietnam. To remember, Amendment 26, 18-year-old get the picks. The final amendment, Amendment 27, says that members of Congress who approve a raise for themselves must win re-election before they are eligible to receive the increased paycheck. To remember, Amendment 27, give me a raise or go to heaven.